Alex Sherman here at Movements for Life. For today's restorative segment, we're going to be talking about the groin, or the adductor group. Now, the adductors are very, very unique and complex because when we talk about putting stretch onto them, they're involved in decelerating every single hip motion with the exception of adduction, right? So when we look at the front leg and the back leg as it relates uniquely to gait, there's going to be involvement on both hips. So we have to be mindful of that info when we start setting somebody up in the cage and starting to stretch the groin. So there's a couple different things that we have to look at with some common bailouts and kind of right side, left side, because the knee, whether it's extended or bent, is going to kind of set us up for which hip is doing the work. So let me explain. So we like setting people up with a kind of open step with my left foot in this case and my right foot nice and straight. Now from here, we really want to drive a lot of hip rotation. So imagine if my hands are on a steering wheel and I want to be able to turn that wheel, right? From 9 to 3 o'clock to be able to start driving it clockwise or counterclockwise. Same concept here. So when I start driving my left hip up, the goal is to be able to stretch my right groin the way that I'm positioned. Now it's going to be really important to reference my trailing hip. What's going to want to happen is, even before I start moving, this hip's going to want to rotate forward. So I want to make sure that it's almost like you're taking your foot and you're going to push it back so that we can really stay in that nice open posture, because when I do that, I just want to make sure that my left knee doesn't come caving and collapsing in. So I want to stay really in that nice open, externally rotated posture, okay? So as I start driving this hip down and rotating that pelvis, I'm going to start putting a lot more load onto my right groin. Now the opposite is true once I start doing the opposite. So when I look at my upper body, I kind of want to do that little weeble wobble. So as I rotate my pelvis to the left, now I'm going to be stretching my left groin, and you could use this as a little self-assessment. As you start moving in the frontal plane, do you start getting more into this left groin, or do you start getting more into this right groin when you rotate to the right? So if you are more restricted in the hip flexed posture, which is going to be when you rotate to the left, stretching left groin, then what you could do is you can actually stay in that posture, put the hands right in front of you, and now we can just start driving in the sagittal plane. So I can start mobilizing my pelvis while I'm already pre-positioned in the frontal plane with that rotation, and now driving that pelvis forwards and backwards in that sagittal plane. For the transverse plane, we actually did a huge in-service on this today, so big kudos and thanks to Tim for enlightening all of us. We went through for transverse plane, instead of rotating that pelvis, which is just going to be feeding a lot of complex information into the pelvis, we can have the use of your abdominals and your T-spine by driving your hand in the transverse plane instead. So I'm rotated in the frontal plane, pre-positioned, right? I'm rotated to my left, and now I'm going to drive my left arm down, which is going to create more load and stretch on that left groin, in this case, that hip flexed hip, okay? So if I'm that person who is hip flexed, I feel more load and restriction here, I'll go through that variation I just did. If you are that person who's more with that extended hip, we're just going to reverse it, do the exact opposite. So I'm going to rotate that pelvis to the right in the frontal plane, and now from here, I'm going to drive into some flexion and extension in the sagittal plane while my pelvis is rotated to the right. And again, just like we did with the transverse plane, we want the help of your abdominals and your T-spine, so let's reposition the body a little differently. So I'm frontal plane loaded to the right, I'm going to be extended nice and tall, I'm going to change my hand position, and now I'm going to include that nice thoracic rotation while my hip was pre-positioned in those other two postures. Oh. Walk that off, and so give that a whirl, see how it feels, From a sequential standpoint, just to review, in case you are new to watching some of these videos, there is a PEMDAS, an order of operations that we like to flow with, if you will. So we always start with our soft tissue work, either foam roll, stick, or lacrosse ball, some kind of mobility work. Do your local mobility work, so some kind of either active stretching in the cage or out on the floor, and then you follow that up with your strengthening or re-education, if you will, to help make all this mobility work stick. So thank you guys so much for watching, and see you next week.